you find something that you hadn't really thought about, then that can be really fun. So John Krasinski had seen Pig, and he reached out to me about Quiet Place, and kind of was just like, "I loved Pig. Can you bring the Pig touch to the Quiet Place world?" And he and Paramount have been talking about kind of what this movie should be, and what they knew they wanted was a day one New York movie. It's like a day one New York invasion, and that was kind of the prompt they gave me, and they gave me a weekend to sort of think about what my in for that would be. And I really, for the longest time, I was like, I don't know, is there anything new to kind of do with that? Like, I feel like we've seen day one invasion movies, especially in New York. Like, that's sort of a genre in and of itself. And then kind of, I remember on Sunday night before our sort of meeting that following Monday, I had sort of this idea of here are all the things I want to avoid. And from thinking of all the things I wanted to avoid, this kind of character emerged that ended up being Sam. Like she kind of for me embodies a lot of bucking a lot of the stuff that like otherwise would be the focus for a movie like this. And that's sort of all it took for me then was, oh, there was a character that kind of appeared in my head and I kind of fell in love with. And then everything else sort of fell into place. And I remember I pitched it to them on Monday and I was like a 30-second pitch. It was like, here's what I'm thinking. Here's a character that I think would be really interesting to follow through this and see her go on her journey. And they were behind it. And then it was just kind of about it was about just they gave me lots of space. I never wrote a treatment for it. They just were like, have at it. I write pretty fast usually. So I went off and like I spent a month in New York just kind of absorbing the city. And yeah, I wrote a vomit pass in like a month and then I kind of honed it. And it was a pretty quick process. But yeah, it was just John gave me a lot of freedom and I found that one character that really kind of hooked me, and then the rest was just kind of a gradual discovery process.
Did you say any of that in the pitch in terms of like, I don't want to do XYZ? Did you
Yeah.
start that
Oh
way?
yeah. I was like, I don't want to do a movie about like someone trying to save their kid or like a military thing or like any of the like, like even I didn't even want to do like someone trying to escape the city or like all the kind of like classic goals of a movie like that. And I won't tell you what I did land on because you kind of have to see the movie to get it. But yeah, I wanted to just avoid the cliches as much as possible, which I think is like useful. I think if a story becomes just that, just like, oh, how do we skirt cliches? It can feel a little empty. And that was why I was struggling with like, okay, here are all the cliches I want to avoid, but like, what does that leave me with? And it wasn't until like kind of that character came out of that suddenly it was like, oh, somehow in avoiding those things, I've found something. So
Did they give you like a Bible of rules to follow? Like in the first one, we saw all the chips are in the aisle and
yeah.
stuff. Like, did they give you stuff like that, like a list or anything?
Not really. No, I mean, like most of that came from I like studied the first two films. I watched through them, took notes, was like thinking about, okay, so if this is that how would this make sense with this timeline and blah blah blah. And I asked John a couple times about things, but like, hey, how what's the intention here? And he would clarify some things, but there's not like there wasn't like a Bible of like here's that where like I kind of knew what I mean I sort of I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot more information in those films than people sometimes give them credit for. Like I think people are always asking like, oh, like how did the creatures get here and this and that, and it's like, well, it's you kind of can tell some of that stuff based on just watching it. So I sort of just used those and studied those and then would check in with stuff with John, and then beyond that there was just kind of some freedom to play with it myself. But yeah, no, there wasn't like a hard document of lore.
You can't have a cat in here.
It's a service cat.
Tell me a little more about the speed in which you write. So you don't do an outline, but you write very quickly, like up to like 30 days. What does that look like logistically? There's no note cards, anything. You're in final draft or whatever, and just kind of going at it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I use Writer Duet because it
Okay.
was free when I started, and it's an in browser writing thing, and it can do all the same stuff as Final Draft. So I like Writer Duet because I write on like a really cheap Chromebook, and I could like break it in half and still have my script. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll change script by script, but in general, it seems like the way I do it is I do a bunch of research, a bunch of like thinking about the characters. Like I'll write about the characters. Like I'll have a notebook and I'll write ideas and I'll start kind of shaping some general stuff without being a clear like A to B, here's what happens. It's just like, oh, I have this idea of like a scene like this, and I have an idea of this. It sort of pieces itself together as I go. Sometimes you hit a little like, oh, something's not like, I don't know how I get to this next part. But I just usually I try to make it so it can be as fluid and natural as possible for that first draft. So I know it's going to be bad, but I also know that it's sort of going to like show me what it wants to be. It's like it'll be messy. It won't be what it needs to be. But reading it through, I'll be like, oh, like thematically, like this is something this project wants to be, or like, oh, I hadn't even thought about that, but like this character has this interesting element that could actually be brought into this thing. So I try to leave it as freeform as possible so that the piece itself can start kind of telling me what it wants to be. And then it becomes, I mean, I guess you could call it editing, but I think it's a little more creative than like just sort of it's sort of like studying this kind of raw thing and trying to figure out what it wants to be and what it is like desiring to sort of become and help sort of like shepherd it towards that. So it's you have like some kind of primordial blob of text and you're like, oh, here's like the 10% of this that I want to keep and that fascinates me. And I find for me, I just find it more fun because then rather than like knowing exactly what I'm going to do and kind of laying it out, I'm like discovering kind of with the process in the same way that I would hope the audience is. Like, you don't want to see a movie and feel like you're being told this, then this, then this. You want to feel like you're kind of discovering it with the film and with the filmmakers. And if I can sort of bring that discovery into my writing process and kind of not know where it's going to end up when I start, I'd like to think that the audience will feel that as well. But at the very least, it's just more fun for me that way.
Does it help that you're, you know, most likely going to be the writer director that you can kind of keep shifting back and forth as needed through the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I don't know. I've never really directed something I haven't written, and I don't have a strong desire for that just because I do, when I'm writing, I tend to write how I imagine it being edited. And obviously, like, that can always change along the way, but like, my scripts tend to be, you can kind of tell where like the cut points are and how this thing is going to piece together. And so I really see directing as kind of like the job of taking the script and gathering all the pieces that I need in order to cut it the way that I'm imagining it.
Do you have any advice for people not in New York and LA who want to kind of break in, become writer directors?
Yeah, it's hard because yeah, I grew up in Wisconsin. I felt very far away. After college, I went out to LA, which it did help just to like be around the industry. Like I'm not really good at schmoozing, but like it's, you always like meet that one person who can connect you with that one person and it's sort of helpful. But I would just say, I mean, the advice I give everyone is if you want to be a writer and if you want to be a director, especially like just make a feature. Make like I think everyone wants to make short films. Short films are useful. They're good. I found them useful in trying to like learn the ropes and learn the technical side of filmmaking. But like if you're doing like a guerrilla style, low budget short, it doesn't take that much more to turn that into a guerrilla style, low budget feature. Like you're still scouting the same locations, you're still casting the same roles. And then a feature is like, even if it's cheap and isn't no one's going to buy it or whatever, like it has a life. Like it can go to some festivals and then you can say you have a feature under your belt and then you can make another one after that. And like, I think I was too afraid when I was younger to like dive in and give that a shot and try and make a feature. But I would say like, if you want to be a writer, find a director that you can work with, write something that you guys can turn into a feature. And I think it's like a scary endeavor to try and like bite that off, but I think it's valuable and it'll like help your career more. And I think you'll just learn a lot more. And it's also going to be like not that much more work. Like, you could shoot a short in like 10 days. You could double that and shoot I mean, Pig we shot in 20 days. And you can then have something that you can say, hey, I'm a feature film director. So yeah, make a feature if you can.